This is a continuation of the prep for lecture 13, and I am going to we just finished talking about, or I had, the 9:3 to 3:1 ratio and where it came from. And I just want to talk quickly about genetic notation. The way you write a genotype provides information to the reader, not just about whether the individual is heterozygous for one or two genes, etc., but also something about the arrangement of the genes. And the ones that we have been talking about when they assort independently, we call those unlinked genes. That means they are on separate chromosomes. For the most part, that's what it means. That's what it'll mean for this class anyway. So we have a certain way of writing the genotype, which I think I will highlight right here. We use the slash between the two alleles, which indicates that they're on two homologs. So when you see the slash, the things on this side are on one of the homologs, and the thing on the other side is on another homolog, right? Like that. And then the semicolon is what tells us they're on actually two different chromosomes. So that is a kind of punctuation that is useful. It tells you something about the genes. Now I'm going to come back to, because in a little while, we're going to do some statistical tests in the next lecture, but after that we're going to be looking at linked genes, and I want to plant the seed of understanding how we write genotypes when two genes are on the same chromosome, so they're not independently assorting, and we'll come to that afterwards. But I want to point out here that the Punnett square method is good for maybe one or two gene crosses, and we've been through those for the previous couple of lectures. But when it gets to be more complicated, if we start looking at tri-hybrid crosses, 3 gene crosses, or even multiple, like five different genes, it's just really cumbersome and difficult to work with a Punnett square, because it would be so easy if you're working with 3 or 4 genes to miss one of the gamete combinations. And then all your numbers are completely off, right? So if you've got 3 genes, you're going to have, along the top, you're going to have 8 different gametes, because there's 8 different combinations of those 3, and then 8 different gametes down the side. And so you're going to have to fill in 64 squares. And it could be, first of all, it will take a long time to write all those out, figuring out all the genotypes and then what all the phenotypes were, and then counting up all the ones that are the same phenotypes and so on. And it just gets to be very error prone. So I find, and I think most people find, a branch diagram method to be the easier method, and you can try this, and if you do find it simpler, then I encourage you to practice it and use it. And what it does is it treats each gene separately. So if you're crossing, yourself, say this is a plant, and you're self-fertilizing this or something, then you look at the outcomes for gene A, and then you look at the possible outcomes for gene B, and then the possible outcomes for gene D, and you multiply, use the product rule to multiply those probabilities. And we did that here by looking at one gene first, and then looking at the other gene second, and then multiplying those probabilities. So this is just an introduction to that branch diagram method, and I just want to go through it and show you how you can actually use it for larger than, more than 2 genes. So here's a case of a tri-hybrid cross. This would be heterozygous for 3 genes and crossed to itself or to another trihybrid, and then looking at the F2, and this shows you, just note that this could be written like this if we were being really picky about the genotypes. But when you're describing a phenotype, it is okay to just say the phenotype will be the dominant. And when you say that, we know that it means this. Or the phenotype is the recessive, and we know that it means that, right? And the branch diagram is you take gene A first, and you look at your, in this case, just 2 outcomes. And then you look at gene B, and you look at the 2 outcomes, but you repeat them. So these 2 outcomes are possible in combination with this allele or this phenotype. And the same 2 combinations are possible with the recessive. Okay, and then the same for C. You have all these 2 combinations possible, and you add them to all the other. That's why it's called a branch diagram. And then when you're trying to figure out a particular outcome, like suppose, for instance, you were going to try to figure out, well, what is the probability of having the recessive phenotype for this gene, but the dominant phenotype for the other 2 genes. You just kind of follow the diagram along, and it would be this one, 1/4 times 3/4 times 3/4, which would be 9/64. Or what is the chance of being recessive for all 3 genes? Well, that's this one plus times this one times this one, and so we multiply all those together and we get this genotype, right? Or this this proportion, this fraction. So the advantage of this is that you can produce a phenotypic ratio for all of the progeny, but you could be asked something like, what is the probability that a particular individual is going to have all the dominant traits? And then you just do, look at that one outcome, and you can figure out the probability of it. So it can be very, very useful. And so here's a couple of examples. So this is a trihybrid cross with pea plants, purple flowers versus white, yellow versus green, and round versus wrinkled. And you basically first figure out the outcomes of each of those crosses separately. And you can even be asked for something really precise, which I haven't done here, but you might be in the class. So if you were doing this the hard way, you'd have like a 64 square Punnett square, and you'd figure out all the different combinations, and then figure out which ones, have all the dominants. But instead, it's much simpler to just go, okay, what is the probability of this genotype, and this genotype, and you just do your multiplication and get your answer. What is, how many would we expect to be round and green and purple? So dominant, but recessive. So you figure out the probabilities of those from up here, and you do your calculation, and it's much quicker. And it could even be, tell me the chance of it being, homozygous for the round, heterozygous for the yellow, and then homozygous recessive for the flower color. And you could figure that out too, which would be 1/4, right, times 1/2 times 1/4. So 1 in 16, no, 1 in 32. 4 times 4, 16 times 2, 1 in 32. So you can actually get as precise as the genotypes at each locus as well. And we're definitely going to have a couple of practice questions on that in the class, because it's just so much quicker than the Punnett square, that if you get into the habit of calculating your probabilities that way, it'll save you a lot of time. Now, here's another twist. So suppose you have independent assortment, but one of the genes is on the sex chromosome, say the X chromosome, in the case of flies and humans and mammals of many types, but the other is autosomal. So 2 questions to ask yourself, and you should stop and think about these before we go on. So if one is autosomal and the other is sex-linked, how are you going to be able to tell? Think about, what would you expect to see in reciprocal crosses because for sex linkage, that is the best way to determine. So long as you know which is the dominant trait, you might be able to tell from a single cross as well. It just depends on how the crosses are done. So, but suppose, for example, you have heterozygous females for an X-linked A gene, males hemizygous, of course, just the dominant, and then heterozygous for the B gene. You would figure this out the same way you would figure out what I showed before, except that the probabilities and the genotypes are going to be different. So the females can provide a dominant or a recessive allele to their progeny, and if the progeny are male, that's the only allele they're going to get because that comes from their mother. But the autosomal one is going to be, 3/4 dominant and 1/4 recessive. This is supposed to be a line with a slash. And so you might want to just take a quick minute and figure out what the progeny will be from this cross. And so if you did it, hopefully you did it, these are the progeny that you would get. Notice some differences. For example, even from this cross, you can tell that one of the traits is sex-linked. Be sure you know why. And then you should go through and do those calculations and figure out what the probability is of each of these using some of the information here. So all the progeny from this male who get the X chromosome are going to have the dominant, and all the ones that get the Y are going to be males, of course, and then these are what mom can pass on to her progeny. That should help you figure out these frequencies. And then once you have figured them out, they need to add up to 100% or 1. So if you do them in fractions, 3/4 and 1/16, or whatever the numbers are that you generate, you're going to make sure that they all add up to 1. That's a good way of checking your work, and it will mean you haven't accidentally left one out or done a calculation wrong. Okay, so this is the summary. So during gamete formation at meiosis, the alleles of different gene pairs will assort independently of one another. And this means that the two genes are subject to independent segregation. Mendel's first law, equal segregation, holds for both genes. And this is the key part. They assort independently so long as they are located on different chromosomes. They're not physically connected with each other. Just picture tossing 2 coins. We'll just make them both heads. And if there's some sort of physical, actual connection with them, now when you toss the coin, if this one comes up heads, it makes a difference to this coin because you have some sort of physical attachment, right? So that's gene linkage, when genes are on the same chromosome. We're going to go there in a couple of lectures, but I want to start you thinking about it in advance. And I also want you to think about recombination in very simple terms. Recombination is the output, the gametes of an individual. So the idea of meiotic inputs means the chromosomes that, in the case of this fictional animal, the chromosomes it inherited, the maternal ones are in this pale blue color, and the paternal ones are in this red color. Now there are going to be 8 different gamete combinations, and we're going to go through some of them in the lecture. So you're going to think about the meiotic outputs because whenever this male passes on basically all of these, what are they, paternal chromosomes, unchanged, that is non-recombinant. But if the alleles are mixed up, so some of the gametes have a paternal and some of the gametes have a maternal chromosome, that is considered to be recombination. And we will talk about that more in the class. And these are the outcomes. So there's only a couple of cases, a couple of possibilities where all of one set that was inherited from a parent are passed on together. Most of the time, we have what are referred to as non-parental combinations. And this is just based on random segregation. When the chromosomes line up during meiosis, we'll just look at two chromosomes. They can separate this way with one maternal and one paternal going into each of the daughter cells, or they can separate this way. This is supposed to be smaller because this is supposed to be a different chromosome. So they could separate with the two paternal ones going together and the two maternal ones going together. Now, even in an organism that has so very few chromosomes, there are 4 different possible types of gametes, right? 2 maternal chromosomes, both going together, 2 paternal, both going together, or 1 maternal and 1 paternal, and the other combination where this one is the paternal and that's the maternal. So, and those would all be not, though 2 of those would be non-parental. So this combination and this combination would be called non-parental, and this combination would be called parental. With 3 chromosomes, it gets more complicated, and with even more chromosomes, it will get even more complicated. And we're going to use these terms when we come back to looking at linked genes and talking about paternal versus non-paternal. Or sorry, parental versus non-parental. I hope I haven't been saying paternal all the time. That's a nuisance. I also want to talk about, oh, this is weird. Oh, that's so strange. Hopefully the formatting won't be messed up. I just want to talk about writing genotypes. So in this case, if we've got gene, we show the genotype like this. If we don't know if genes A and B are in the same or different chromosomes, we write them with a dot between the two. Suppose you're doing a cross and that cross is going to tell you if the genes are on different chromosomes or not. Then we can we show it this way. If we know the genes are on separate chromosomes, that is, they're not connected to each other, then we write the genotype this way. And then this notation is when genes are together on the same chromosome, and we write it to indicate which alleles are together on one homolog. So this would be written like this: big A, big B, and then the slash. Remember, the slash refers to the fact that everything on this side is on one homolog and everything on this side is on the other homolog. So this would be written this way with the 2 dominants on one homolog and the 2 recessives on the other. And this one would be written like this. Because this shows you that the dominant A and the recessive B are on this homolog. Maybe that's from the mother, for example, and this is the one from the father. The recessive A and the dominant B. And hopefully that, I hope that will be clear. I want to make sure these ideas are sort of introduced and have been talked about a little bit before we start diving into them more when we talk about linked genes and how we use recombination for mapping purposes and that sort of thing. Okay, we will see you in class.